We talked about the word attitude because it's not what most people would assume. It's just don't let them be neutral. So let them have their biases, part of the reason why I think the voice works so well here is because Marcellus notices different things, pays attention to different things, and Tova's, the one talking about her back popping and things that only Tova would say or think about. Welcome to the Fiction Writing Made Easy podcast. My name is Savannah Gilbo, and I'm here to help you write a story that works. I want to prove to you that writing a novel doesn't have to be overwhelming. So each week, I'll bring you a brand new episode with simple, actionable, and step-by-step strategies that you can implement in your writing right away. So whether you're brand new to writing or more of a seasoned author looking to improve your craft, this podcast is for you. So pick up a pen and let's get started. In today's episode, we're diving deep into the opening pages of Remarkably Bright Creatures by Shelby Van Pelt. And I'm so excited to share this episode with you today because we're doing things a little different with our analysis this time. We're still going to look at the first chapter to see how and why it works. So we want to find out how does it hook our attention and pull us into the story. And we're also going to talk about how it gives us a glimpse at the big picture of the story too. But this time I'm coming to the analysis from not having read the entire book, so I only read the first chapter, and Abigail has read the entire book. So we thought it would be kind of fun to see how our analysis may or may not change if we came to the conversation with different amounts of context about the overall story. And speaking of Abigail, if you've been listening to this podcast for a while, you know who Abigail is. But just in case you're brand new, Abigail K. Perry is a developmental editor, a book coach, and the host of an amazing podcast called Lit Match, where she helps writers find the best literary agent for their writing and publishing careers. I'm going to link to Abigail's podcast in the show notes, as well as where you can find her around the internet if you would like to get in touch with her. Okay, so that's a very quick overview of what we're going to dig into today, and you're going to hear more explanation of the tools we're using to do this analysis once we get into the episode. So with all of that being said, let's go ahead and dive right into the conversation.
I'm super excited because we love doing analysis together, and now we're going into upmarket territory, which is something that I love. And this is a book that I picked and that I've read, but you haven't read. And I've done this with a couple of writers and authors and other book coaches now on how to analyze when someone has read the full book versus when someone hasn't read the book. And it's come out with some really cool accusations and analysis tips. So I'm really excited to do this with you.
I'm excited too, and it's so fun because this is not necessarily a book I would pick up based on the back cover, just because it's nothing wrong with the book, of course, just because it's not normally the style I'm drawn to. But it was a really fun experience to read the first chapter and kind of mini introduction. I don't know if we're going to call it a prologue in disguise or what, but we'll get there. But yeah, it's an interesting feeling coming in, not having all of the answers. So we'll see how that goes, but it should be fun.
Really, really funny. Just kind of like side tip for the listeners, because when I had proposed this one and you're like, wait, is it the one with the woman and the octopus? I was like, yes, that is the one I'm talking about. So there's, I think just conceptually, I haven't really seen anything like this. I love animal narrators, and there is an animal narrator in this, and it's done really well. I think you either nail it or you don't when you have an animal narrator, but I love it in this, and it makes it really unique. So you talked about that first, I would probably call it a prologue in disguise, if not just like an introduction to Marcellus the octopus.
Yeah.
So we should talk about that first, because I think that is a really important part of introducing the story, even though it's not what we're going to analyze deeply, because I don't think that there's a scene there. Did you think that there was a scene in that?
I did not. It just feels like we're meeting Marcellus, like you said, and getting a feel for his voice. I did think there was some really cool elements to it. So the very first line, "Darkness suits me," I love that. And then he's kind of explaining to us that he lives in a tank. He lived in the sea. He was captured and imprisoned. His name's Marcellus. So he's telling us all this. He's normally referred to as that guy by people looking into his tank. And he's basically telling us that he's a pretty smart fella, even though he's an octopus. Some other things too, he gets nicknames from humans. He's just kind of giving us the lay of the land. But what I really liked is the end of this intro to him. It says, "I must advise that our time together may be brief. The plaque states one additional piece of information. The average lifespan of a giant Pacific octopus, 4 years. My lifespan, 4 years, 1,460 days. I was brought here as a juvenile. I shall die here in this tank. At the very most, 160 days remain until my sentence is complete." So that's our intro to Marcellus.
Yeah, definitely picking up on really important pieces of Marcellus's voice, first of all, as well as what he pays attention to. just step back quickly, real quick, just to, in case listeners don't know the book, Remarkably Bright Creatures, that is what we're analyzing. So it's Remarkably Bright Creatures by Shelby Van Pelt. And essentially what this story is about is the main character is going to be Tova Sullivan. And she is a 70-year-old woman who works as a cleaner at an aquarium. And she had a son, Eric, who went missing. It was, dubbed a suicide, but she never really believed that was fully a suicide. They found his body had fallen off of a boat years back when he was younger and, like a late teenager. And he was 18, I think he was 18 when it happened. So she has this mystery of what happened to her son. And then you're also going to meet another character who is going to come into play. His name's Cameron, and he's going to wind up in Seattle in search of his parents. So he's looking for his father. He knows who his mother is, but he doesn't know who his father is. So you have that going on. And then throughout all of this, you have the point of view of Marcellus. And Marcellus will come in and out of his own chapters. But it's really interesting because it creates a lot of dramatic irony later in the story, specifically around the midpoint. Marcellus picks up on something really important. And just as, full disclosure to listeners, probably spoilers will come out in this analysis, because I think it's going to help us see why the opening pages do a really great job at introducing important key concepts of the story, as well as the characters. So just as a quick summary of that. So those were the things that you were drawn to from Marcellus's point of view. Did you like his voice overall?
I did, and I just felt sad the whole time I was reading it, basically. I am an animal lover, so I don't like that he's in captivity, but also the words that he used, like I was captured and imprisoned. And then at the end where he says, 160 days remain until my sentence is complete.
Yeah.
So it just feels heavy.
It does.
Yeah.
And what I think is really brilliant about this, and this is all captured in about a page and a half. If you have the printed version, I don't know what the ebook version would be.
Yeah, it's about the same.
Okay, so it's about a page and a half. So it's not a full scene, like we said. We're not looking for a value shift when we are introduced to Marcellus. But what it does an excellent job at is introducing us a key point of view in this story and how it's going to help unravel this mystery. At the same time, it is putting a time clock on the table with that. So it's like, it's not guaranteed that he only has that much time left until his death, but he very much believes that he's going to die in this aquarium. And you learn like later in the story that he was rescued after being severely injured by these eels. So you learn that he was injured. They took him in, but then he never went back to the ocean, and he desperately longs for freedom. So he definitely uses numbers as a way of counting down his sentence. Like that's like, you can see like all the words, all the diction that he's using there show his disdain for being trapped in captivity, right?
Yeah, and it's interesting because he's like talking about the humans. They sometimes share their experience with the visitors, and they're like, see him back there? He's a special guy. And he's like, a special guy indeed. Like humans,
Yeah. Which is one of my favorite things that I love about him, though, because you are reading lessons in chemistry now, which I know.
Yeah.
So that's another one that I love. And 630 is a point of view in that story, and it's a dog's perspective. And I think one thing that I really love when there are animal perspectives, I'm also an animal lover, is when people underestimate animals and animals call them out for that. So, this is Marcellus straightforward. Like he's blunt and blatant and very much, kind of knocking down a human's ignorance and underestimating his intelligence, even though they claim he is a remarkably bright creature.
Well, and I think it's cool that he's not neutral. He has a strong opinion, and he's got feelings, and he's going to tell us.
Absolutely. And I think that's really important for the first person, pronouns that we're using here too, because when you have first person, you need a strong attitude. So he is very observant and does state his opinion. At the same time, one thing that's very interesting about this is he addresses the reader with you, like who am I, you ask? And I haven't seen that a lot. And I think he does this very naturally, though, because you feel like he's telling you the story directly, right?
Well, and what's also interesting is if we think about him in his tank alone, he probably muses to himself like this.
Yeah.
So I can totally imagine him just kind of being like, who am I, you ask? Just because he's bored and he's alone and he's in captivity. So I think, it's great.
Yeah, it's awesome. Okay. So that's really cool about just introducing us to Marcellus and how Marcellus is going to be this key narrator in the story and companion really to Tova, who is going to be the main human protagonist. And that's who we open up with in this first chapter. So, as per our usual first chapter analysis episodes, we will analyze the opening pages of the story in order to look at the big picture with the 7 key first chapter questions, as well as the scene structure, which I'll call it now the first chapter, does with the 5 commandments coming from StoryGrid and Remarkably, along with some other, prerequisite questions that we go over in order to understand like character want and things that are important in order to see how the commandments challenge that. So in the first chapter, it's called the Silver Dollar Scar. And that's where we're starting right now. So for me, it starts on page 3. And I'm calling that now the official first chapter, even though technically it would appear as a second chapter because we don't have Marcellus's point of view labeled as prologue, but I'm calling it a prologue in disguise.
Yeah.
And in this first chapter, the person that we follow is Tova Sullivan. So Tova Sullivan is a 7-year-old woman who I've mentioned works as a cleaner at this aquarium called Puget Sound in Seattle. And she spends her nights cleaning. She has a lot of details where she talks about certain things that you can tell she's very OCD with her cleaning. She's exceptional at her job. She brings her own products in, a combination of lemon and oil, sort of things like that, because she likes that scent a lot more. You learn some backstory, like her son, who is no longer in her life because he's dead, as well as her husband, who you suspect has passed away from cancer. And one of the reasons why she's carrying this different cleaning product is because of the smell that irritated her in the hospital. So when she comes in, she's cleaning, she admits that this is something to do. And there's really great description that will describe things like how her back pops when she stands up at one point and it echoes down the hallway. And it's maybe not something that she needs to do, but you can tell that she's occupying herself. As she's going through the aquarium, she addresses very kindly all of the sea creatures. She passes the eels and doesn't really love the eels, but still gives them a courteous smile. But her favorite is Marcellus. And Marcellus is the octopus and is blending into his environment. Meanwhile, Tova is really focused in and zeroed in on cleaning up this 1 wad of gum that she's trying to pick up. And eventually she sees Marcellus has escaped his tank and he's stuck behind the vending machine. So she goes over, she unplugs the cord, she gets Marcellus out from his wedged in corner and gets him back in his tank. And he looks a little more peakish than he did before. She finishes up cleaning for the night and heads home. So it's a pretty straightforward chapter with action, but there's a lot of really important setups and details in the description that I think, brings us closer to the characters, as well as some major plot points that are going to build as you go into the story itself.
Yeah.
So now what we're going to do is we're going to look at this first chapter and maybe we'll take into consideration Marcellus's opening voice as well as we enter these 7 key first chapter questions. And these come from Paul Muniz, The Writer's Guide to Beginnings. And the first of these deals with genre. So the question is, what kind of story is it? And just as a reminder, when Savannah and I are talking about genre, we categorize it in 2 different ways. Content genre, the type of story that this is, in order to satisfy reader expectations, versus commercial genre, how this would be marketed. So what did you think this was, Savannah?
Earlier, you had mentioned that we're in upmarket territory. I do agree. As far as content genre, I wasn't quite sure based on the opening, which was a really fun thought exercise for me because I'm like, okay, what do I pick up on? If I'm just an average reader coming to this, I've read the back cover copy, I've read Marcellus's first chapter, and I've read Tova's first chapter, right? Mm-hmm. So I know from the back cover copy, there's a little bit of a mystery element. I would say my gut is saying that's not the primary genre of the story. My other thought was there's obviously some death stakes for Marcellus, but I don't know how I would feel about classifying that as action, so I might put that to the side. And then the third place I went was this is kind of a meet cute scene when Tova and Marcellus meet. So I wondered if it was going to be more about their friendship and kind of framed in more of like a love story genre. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of where my thought process ended.
Okay. So super interesting. Yes. Upmarket is book club fiction is what I would categorize this as commercially. It does. And when I say upmarket, it's really that baby between literary and commercial. So you can tell on the line level that there is a lot of sophistication with the voice. It's an extremely strong voice for each character. We're in first person for Marcellus, which we'll get into with point of view, and then you have third person for other bits. But really, the line level is exceptional. And then in addition, there is still plot, though, that is working with character. So it's not undervaluing plot. And what you're pulling out here, which we'll get into plot in the second question, it's interesting to hear what you pulled out as potential options for content genre. I would say that the main content genre for the story, first and foremost, is probably going to deal more with a worldview story. And it's going to be this internal arc, but the internal arc can only work if it is challenged by external plot lines. Yeah. And you really have pulled out the three that I think are the big ones. So
yeah, and that's, interesting you say worldview, because from this, I think I could go two avenues. One with Marcellus is maybe he's not the biggest fan of humans, so maybe that's what's going to change. For Tova, I wouldn't know what to say if you asked me what is her starting worldview that's going to change. Yeah. So what would you say is her starting worldview?
I think when we go with worldview, I think a lot of it is that, well, she's an elderly woman who has had to take care of herself for a long time, right? Yeah. And also she is grieving because she lost her son all those years ago. So as she goes forward, you'll see that she has a lot of friends, and, she'll make comments about how her friends have other options in their life because they have children. So, they can be taken care of eventually by their children. And you'll notice in the first pages in this first chapter that she does make some sort of reference to, is this how it starts when she starts to see Marcellus and she's like, is this hallucinating? So you can tell that age is something that she is conscientious of. Right. And not necessarily allowing it to pull her down in life, but I think she is aware, I'm getting older and I'm getting tired.
Right. And which is really interesting comparing that to Marcellus, who's like, I have 160 days left.
And they're both very solace in their lives. Like they very much do stick to themselves. Yeah. So there is absolutely a friendship, and even so a protective friendship between the two of them, especially created based on this scene where she rescues him. Right. So there is that going on. With the worldview, back to your question, I actually think I would categorize this more as like a worldview revelation arc, because what you're going to move towards is in the climactic moment, she's going to learn the truth. And this is a huge spoiler. You've been warned. Yeah, it's like, this is the climax of the story. So Marcellus is going to help her discover that Cameron, this boy who comes searching for his father in Seattle, is actually her grandson. So she is not alone in the world with family. And I think that a lot of her arc is through this friendship with Marcellus. And because of it, she comes to know the truth that she is not, she's not without family, that she does have a grandson, and they're going to have this life together in the end, which is a really beautiful part. And I think like a big part of this is that going through the story, the mystery component is huge. And that's even like when you look at the back cover, that's what they're pitching it as. That's really the hook factor of it, right? Is that there's this mystery. I'll just read it even. Tova Sullivan's husband died. She began working the night shift at the Sewell Bay Aquarium, mopping floors and tidying up. Keeping busy has always helped her cope, which she's been doing since her 18-year-old son, Eric, mysteriously vanished on a boat in Puget Sound over 30 years ago. So I think that's really what's being pitched as the huge hook of the story, is this friendship between an octopus and an elderly woman. But I think that is the external plot line that hooks us, right?
That's fun, because where my brain went towards the relationship a little more too, and I started thinking before you said what the end was going to be, that maybe they would find meaning in their last days together. But it's more like they probably are, right? But she's also finding meaning through the information he delivers to her via who Cameron is. So I could definitely see, based on all that, the worldview being a big part of it. Yeah. And also there's this spot that says at 70 years old, they don't expect her to do such deep cleaning, but she must at least try. Besides, it's something to do. So like clearly she needs something she needs to find some kind of meaning for her existence.
She's just buying time. And it's like, it's not that she doesn't have friends. She's a very likable person. Yeah. A lot of people like her. Like, I don't think there's anyone really who doesn't like her. Yeah. And I think that for her, though, she's still lonely. Yeah. So it's, she's lived in the same house all her life, and the same house with her husband and son. And then even after her son, like then it was her and her husband. So that's part of it too, is like how much longer can she do this on her own?
Yeah.
And I think that when I go to worldview as the content, it's something that I've seen a lot in these upmarket stories. And it's that the thread that holds everything together is really tied to the emotional journey. So emotionally, like what is this character going through and how is what she lacking emotionally going to be filled by the end?
Yeah.
And through that, there's not necessarily even one, although I try to, encourage writers to pick one dominant external genre. A lot of the times there will be at least two, if not three, external
Yeah.
threads that continually challenge the internal story. But if I were to plot out what are the major moments in the story, maybe one of them, like in this scene, right, like as an opening image, how are we seeing Tova in her opening image? We get senses that she's lonely, right? We get
Yeah.
senses that she's old. And what is challenging that is when she's going to start to have this bond with Marcellus. So there's that friendship story.
Right.
But that friendship story might not necessarily always take precedence in other key scenes.
Right.
Like the mystery might be more of a storyline. But realistically, like Tova isn't looking for what happened to her son. So it's
Right.
not that heavy of it. We're not on a crime case here, right?
Yeah.
She doesn't believe that her son committed suicide, but she doesn't think it's foul play, right?
Yeah. And she's probably at the stage where she's like, what am I going to do about this? I can't really do anything.
And he died when he was 18,
Right.
it was like years and years and years ago. So it's kind of just one of those things where she's been grieving with it. So with all of that, it's this area of the mystery is something that becomes essential to her filling the lack in her life, which I think is loneliness and feeling like she's, kind of like Marcellus in the sense that we're just counting time down now. Right.
Yeah. Speaking of the loneliness, because I see writers sometimes like they'll try to set up their character, whether they're lonely, depressed, whatever that kind of more negative feeling vibe is. They do it in a way that's not quite effective. And I think this version of a lonely character is effective. And we see that she's lonely by the way she interacts with the animals and what she notices. Because she notices things that someone who's got a full life is probably not going to take the time to notice.
Yes, absolutely. And I think that's really important because I do think, especially, I really love stories with grief. I think I gravitate towards those stories more than any other story. And there's a big difference between a character, especially if you're in first person, you can go into the edge of redundant or whiny. And just because we're so focused on the depression, and while that's realistic, it's not driving a plot forward. Right.
And Tova, like I am not 70, so immediately it's not going to be super easy for me to relate to her, but the way that the author has painted her, I do relate to her. And I don't think she's mopey. I think she's a very likable character that just so happens to be lonely. I relate to her big time because of her love of animals. So I think she pulled it off really well.
Yeah. And I say whiny. I'm not trying to be like negative with that either.
No,
it's just,
but it is. It comes off as whiny, right?
And Tova's not that way though. Like she's kind of the opposite in the sense of, well, I'm not going to allow myself to sit around and mope.
Yeah.
Right? She's like, I'm going to do something about this.
And she notices the quiet things that most people don't. And I think that makes her really likable.
Yes. I think that her appreciation and treatment of the sea creatures in general just makes her a really sympathetic character.
Yeah.
So that's where I went. I was probably going to prioritize the worldview story. And with that, if I were to analyze this and break this down on a, key plot level, which will move into the second question, I'd probably be looking for how the three main external genres that you pulled out, the mystery and, friendship, kind of almost love story, but not romantic love, and
the impending death.
Yes, the impending death, the action. And the action is the most subtle of them because it's not action that you're facing in a life or death threatening way. It's the inevitability of death with age. So that's where it's like it's definitely there. It's a stake, but it's not the same. We're not in an Avengers movie here and having a life and death action.
Avengers with octopus. Right? I think it's cool though because like I said, I had no idea other than the first few pages I read in the back cover copy. And through that, I was able to pull out those things that you said are accurate, right? So this author has done a great job dropping the clues to what type of story is coming, even if we had no context for everything else.
And that's what, the character that we don't meet in this first chapter that is another major point of view is Cameron. And his is a worldview maturation arc where he's dealing with a lack of sophistication. He has been someone who really has lacked parental guidance in his life. He has his aunt who has been there for him and supported him. But in general, his mother is a drug addict and out of his life. And he's never even known or heard of his father. He has no idea who his father is.
Yeah.
So you see in the very beginning when we meet him, there's a breakup with his girlfriend, and his girlfriend's basically telling him he needs to go grow up. And he is very likable because he is not someone that you really see as overly immature, but you can see that there's a lack of following through maybe in his life. And, can you blame him? He's had no really guidance his entire life. So I think what you like about him is that he's setting out on his journey. He really believes that this guy named Simon is his father, and he travels to Seattle to try to find him and ends up getting a job as Tova's replacement cleaner until she heals from an injury that she has, and they start to bond over that. So really, like, their relationship starts to become something that is, explored and comes to fruition through the plot events, but they're really on their own arcs in their own way, which is cool.
Yeah, and it's cool how they both, based on what you just said, they feel like they're both untethered or like unmoored, whatever word I'm looking for, and then kind of coming together gives them both an answer.
Yeah. And that's kind of what's reinforcing the second question. So the second question is dealing with plot. The question is, what is the story really about? And I would say this story is really about the friendship between an elderly woman and this octopus. At the same time, it's the finding of one another between a grandmother and a strange grandson. And the story is really about his pursuit of his biological father.
Yeah.
So you can see, like, something like Cameron's story really is dealing a lot with the mystery arc intentionally. He is pursuing a mystery, right?
Mm-hmm.
And Tova's existing. So Tova she's going through her everyday life. I think that she's dealing with questionings of, is she getting too old to take care of herself, and dealing with that. And at the same time, bonding with Marcellus and trying to protect Marcellus from ever getting too far into trouble because he likes to escape and roam. And Marcellus, his main arc is dealing with, once he figures out that Tova and Cameron are related, his goal is to try to help Tova find out the truth, because Tova's the only human that he really cares for. And eventually, like in a climactic moment, Tova rescues Marcellus from his tank. And, again, spoilers, but she rescues him from his tank because his replacement comes in the end, because they know that he's dying, and she wants him to breathe the ocean. So she helps him escape from his tank, and she lets him loose in the ocean for whatever many days he has left.
Oh my gosh. And I'll tell you, it's so funny because I tend to be really sensitive about animals dying when the story is more about them dying than like if it's I don't know, in a fantasy story, a random horse will die. Like, that's sad, but it's not the main point of the story. So anyway, if I read the back cover copy and I got past that and I'm like, okay, I'm going to open this book, and then I read the first page or two where it's like, I have 160 days left, I might not finish the book because I can't handle that stuff.
Well, that's what's so beautiful about this is, like, how is Marcellus finding meaning with those days, as well as Tova. And something really cool is because Tova becomes really Cameron's mentor. At first it's helping with cleaning, but she has a strong grasp on life and how to live it well, and what is, what's acceptable and what's not. And she'll call Cameron out on things and helps really mentor him and guide him on how to be a more adult human being. And that's what he's missed his whole life. So that's really cool. And then within that, you have Marcellus. And one of the things that really bonds Tova and Cameron is that Cameron is cleaning, and he learns that Marcellus escapes the tank. And Terry, he's the manager of the aquarium. And Tova finds out that Cameron knows. And she's like, you cannot tell Terry. Because she's nervous what Terry will do to Marcellus.
Yeah.
And she's like, you can't tell him. We have to protect him. So Cameron and Tova have this inside promise to make sure that Marcellus does his thing, but also is kept in secret of what he's doing.
That's cute.
Yeah, it's super cute. And then you really like Terry at the end, though, because you learn that Terry has known all along that Marcellus has been crawling around because he eats other animals.
Oh my God.
Yeah. So
they just let him do his thing.
He's a remarkably bright creature, right? Yeah. So I think that's really where we're going with the plot. And then the point of view is extremely important. That's the third question. Who is telling the story? I think this is paramount to how the whole story functions. And Marcellus is in this first person. And like you said, like he does address the reader, but I agree with you, Savannah, when you said that it's almost like he would talk to himself anyway. It's not like we're addressing in second person. It's
Yeah.
really first person, but this is probably how he talks all the time to himself, a loner, you know?
Yeah, and I could just see him kinda making it's like he's like Tova, right? Making the best of a bad situation.
And then when you go into the first chapter, you see that the majority of the novel is third person limited.
Yeah.
So we're dealing with third person limited with Tova, and then we'll have third person limited with Cameron. So
Yeah.
it's interesting. I'm curious what you think about that, moving from first person with Marcellus to third person with Tova and Cameron. Do you think that that's a strategic move? What did you like or not like about
I
that?
mean, I feel like it probably was strategic because we're grounded in Marcellus first, where it's like we see things through his point of view, and then we zoom out just a little bit where we're watching the people, probably like Marcellus is watching the people.
Yes,
So yeah, I think it was and it didn't bother me as a reader. It's
I
funny
liked
'cause
it. I thought it was pretty natural.
yeah, I thought it was too, and I'm just thinking because the other day in one of my group calls, I said, like, "We don't wanna be switching point of view like
Mm.
this," and that person was asking about in a romance, can I have the one partner be first person and the other person be third person? And I felt like that was too hectic because of the equal weight in the story. Where here, it's like Marcellus is not gonna be a big part of the weight, right? In the
He's a big
chapters?
part of the dramatic irony, and I think that he gives us a unique factor of the story. But I would say I mean, I haven't clocked out percentages, but a
Yeah,
heavy percentage of the story is going to be Tova and Cameron. Marcellus is interspersed between those chapters.
with short
And they're
little
short.
pages, right?
Yeah, and they're short. I mean, they're not all the same length, but they're going to be scenes. He is
Yeah,
going to have scenes versus like this first opening is a page and a half. They're going to be longer than that.
yeah,
But I think that the majority of the time, we're not in an aquarium, right? The majority of
yeah.
the time, we of course are spending time in the aquarium, but we're also out of it and exploring Tova and Cameron and their lives.
Yeah.
So,
And something you said made me think of like why something like if you're writing a romance and you want to just switch for the heck of switching, it's like
mhm,
that's not a deliberate choice, right? You're doing that because you just think it would be fun or it would like, make the reading experience fun. Where this is done very deliberately to give us a certain experience. So
mhm.
that's I think why it works.
And this, I think, is a testament to Shelby's writing abilities in that she keeps it third person limited with Tova and Cameron, but they clearly do have a distinct voice. The narrative voice comes through for each of those characters as effectively as Marcellus's voice comes
Yeah.
through in first person. So that's really cool because one thing with first person limited that I'm always emphasizing is that, the word they say is attitude. Like first
Uh-huh.
person needs to have a really strong attitude. And I think that both Tova and Cameron have their own attitude, but it's just a little bit more distant. Although third person limited in this way, because it limits us in their perspective, still does feel very much like we're in their head because we
Right.
are, you know?
I remember in one of our book club meetings, we talked about the word attitude because it's not what most people would assume. It's
Mhm.
just don't let them be neutral. So let them have their biases. Part of the reason why I think the voice works so well here is because Marcellus notices different things, pays attention to different things. And Tova's, the one talking about her back popping and things that only Tova would say or think about, right?
Right.
Sure,
Right.
Cameron's chapters are the same. So it's more just like let that person be that person and lean into it.
Yeah, very well said. And a perfect lead into the fourth question, which deals with character. Which
Mhm.
character should readers care about the most?
Yeah. Well, and this is funny because in both of their scenes, they're alone, right? So, I
Uh-huh.
mean, not that Marcellus is a scene, but I obviously really care about Marcellus because he's an animal and he's telling us he's dying.
Mhm.
Easy. And then in Tova's, it's like you just feel bad, right? You want to be her friend and you want her to not be lonely.
I like Toba too. That's where
Yeah.
it's like, I think she's tough. Like
Yeah. I'd
I
say.
like her. I think that she's someone who if I met her in real life, I would want to be friends with her. She has this it factor about her, and I think it's maybe just her I mean she's kind, right? There's a woman who addresses the sea creatures while she's cleaning. Yes, I want to be friends with that person.
Right. And she
So,
doesn't seem to have an ego or like,
no.
she's not materialistic. She's really down to earth and having fun.
Yeah, she's very grounded.
Yeah.
And I think that you can tell that she has been through adversity and she's still standing. So there's like definitely more that meets the eye to her. And I think that that makes me want to learn more about her. So for anyone who takes the time to rescue an octopus who's stuck behind a vending machine, yes, I want to meet you.
Right.
And even when, one of the things what happens is Marcellus wraps his tentacles around her and the suction cups basically they bruise her arm. And her friends make comments about that earlier, but while they hurt her, she doesn't even really flinch. Like she almost draws
curious.
back, but she wants to help him. So, definitely there's a reason why and Marcellus will tell you this. I don't think it's the next chapter probably, but Marcellus will tell you this, that he doesn't really like humans, but he likes Tova.
Yeah.
And that's a really unique trick with characters. I mean, not that there are many reasons to like Tova, but if you do have a character that is unlikable and you have another character that we like them, that's actually a trick to get readers to like them. And Marcellus he's just scrappy. I just like him,
Yeah, because if we were stuck in a cage, we'd want to be like Marcellus, trying to get out and have fun.
Mm-hmm. And just his awareness of things, like I like that he calls it as it is. I like people who are direct, and that's Marcellus's point of view too. So I cared about both of them. For the fifth question, it's about setting. And the question is, where and when does the story take place?
Yeah. So for this scene, we're in the aquarium, right? Which I always think about, okay, is the location important in the story? Yes, right? We're going to see more of this. And we already established Marcellus as how Cameron and Tova get brought together. So it makes sense that the opening scene would be here.
So it's Sewell Bay Aquarium, which I don't know if they state specifically in the first chapters, but it is in the back cover. And I believe this is in Seattle because Cameron travels to Seattle to find Simon. So we'll find all of that in the story, but not necessarily grounded in this. But like exactly what you said, the setting of where they actually are, despite location, is that we are in an aquarium. And in the aquarium is where a lot of the relationships that we need to see developed are going to evolve. Yeah. So that's really important. Also, I think it's important that they're near the sea, that they're in a state that's near the sea, and that, also pertains to Eric and what happened to him.
Yeah, I think it's also interesting that there's not like a lead up scene into this. We are meeting Tova in her everyday life. And it's not like we're meeting her at her house and she's getting ready for work. And, she's like looking at pictures of her kid that's dead and her husband that's no longer here.
Right.
We're literally just dropped into her everyday life and there's not a lot of lead up.
That's what I love about it, though, because you can tell just even because we are grounded in Tova that she thinks of her husband and her son daily.
All the time.
Right. Yeah. They are constantly on her mind and in her heart, but she doesn't allow that to
stop her.
Yeah. Yeah. Like that, like that's exactly it. Like I think that a lot of writers can go to the place if they want to ground us in the depression. And I get that, like in the Midnight Library, the opening chapter deals with Nora and her house. And I think that you can go there. But what I like so much about Tova is that the setting is one of the hook factors, right? So we're seeing her interact with her environment, and her very much you understand who she is as a character by her attitude of, I can't just do nothing.
Right.
Right. So,
and something you said earlier, like, I don't remember if you said it or if I said it actually, but it was like, it's an active scene. So the advice that writers hear all the time is start with action and like, look at all we're following. She's trying to clean up gum and she's rescuing an octopus that gets out of the tank. But for a 70-year-old woman, this is not easy. So like for her, this is impactful action and it's exciting because it's, for multiple reasons, but like it wouldn't be exciting if it was a 17-year-old boy who could easily maneuver and like thought an octopus was super cool and like, wanted to pick it up. Right.
Mm-hmm. And that's where the description and details, that's where that comes back. And this is more maybe backwards a little bit and going more to the point of view. But again, we're really zeroed in on what matters to Tova, what her observations are, what Marcellus's observations are. And one thing that we do get heavy description on, because if you're going to spend more details on something, it's probably going to have significance later in the plot. One of the descriptions that we really zero in on is this moment where she is cleaning a Pacific sea lion. So the line is, she passes the shallow alcove with its life-size bronze statue of a Pacific sea lion, the sleek spots on its back and bald head, worn smooth from decades of being petted and climbed on by children, only enhance its realism. Mm-hmm. On Tova's mantle at home, there's a photo of Eric, perhaps 11 or 12 at the time, grinning wildly as he straddles the statue's back, one hand aloft like he's about to throw a lasso, a sea cowboy. Yeah. So what's really cool about that is that we zero in on this because this is something, because it's so worn down, it's emphasized that a lot of people might not pay attention to cleaning every inch of it, and Tova always does. And also it connects again back to what's important to her at home, which is this picture of Eric. So it's connecting the two. And later, Marcellus is going to hide a key piece of evidence underneath the sea lion. So that's something that's really cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. And then, so question number 6 deals with core emotion. The question is, how should readers feel about what's happening?
Yeah. So I felt like heavy and I felt sad for both of these characters. I did have hope though, just because I know the story is going to take me somewhere, but I want them to have happy endings.
So it's so interesting because I didn't necessarily feel somber, but I did feel, I guess, like, I'm trying to figure out, like, I don't get the feeling of like, I feel really sad when you read these pages, but I think a lot of that is because of Tova's attitude.
Yeah.
But I do think that I mean, I don't know if pity is the right word though. Like, I do have sympathy. So maybe I was sad and I just didn't know I was feeling that way.
Yeah. It's almost like you just want them to have a better scenario.
Yeah, you do. I mean, that's where it's like, I think I was intrigued. I think that I felt big feels. I guess that's where I'm going to go. I don't have the right words for what those feelings were, but I felt very much concerned and exactly what you're saying there, that I cared about these characters in the way that I wanted them to have a happy ending, because I felt like their life wasn't happy right now.
Right.
And I wanted it to be better for them.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
So yeah. So maybe the word is sad that I'm looking for.
Yeah,
but
it's like sad with a little hope, I guess.
Yeah.
But you're also entertained by the way that she kind of manhandles the octopus, right? Like,
well, and I think that's
not
maybe
scared.
that's the thing, because the action itself of when Marcellus is stuck behind the vending machine, I think it's like 18 minutes or something that an octopus can actually be out of water.
Yeah.
But when he's stuck, that changes my emotion as well. There's an immediacy to it and a sense of danger. But the majority of the time, we're sitting in these internal states that are really drawing us close to their emotions. And then in the moment that she's saving him, there's excitement. But when she does save him, there's relief and there's hope because of this friendship that seems to be blossoming.
And that actually kind of leads us into the next question. I'm going to skip ahead, which is stakes. Why should we care, right?
Right.
And we've been given all the ingredients we need to care. If I had to ask what is at stake, I mean, happiness, right? Or like fulfillment, whole life.
Yeah,
like,
I think well-being, right?
Yeah.
Like someone's well-being. And then for Marcellus in the first chapter, it's life or death because of what's at stake for him. For Tova, I think it's, purpose maybe. Like it's also like kind of what else?
Meaning.
Yeah, meaning. I think it's probably that. It's probably what's her sense of meaning in life. Like what's next for her. Right.
Yeah.
Right now, it seems like she's just on a pretty surefire path towards a retirement home eventually. Right. And actually, that is where we head in the story.
It's the same with Marcellus too, like, because he knows he's only got so many days left. What's he going to do with them? So
yeah, I think meaning would probably be the best stake that I would put on there.
Okay, cool. So I think it's really interesting because I was expecting us to have a lot of different answers because I haven't read it, but it seems like I think this is why we can say the first chapter works, because we came to the same conclusions. So that it's just a fun exercise for people who are listening. With beta readers, you can even ask them some of these questions and say, like, what did you come up with for my first chapter? If all 6 of your beta readers say the same thing, you're probably doing a pretty good job. So we'll get into the scene structure now. And like Abigail said earlier, we're going to use the Story Grid / Robert McKee 5 Commandments to pick that apart. So really, we want to find what's the character's goal, what kind of conflict gets in the way, what tough decision are they going to face? And we'll explain these a little bit more as we get in. And then kind of what's the end result, or how did things change? So it's funny because in my head yesterday, I was thinking like, oh, this will be so fun because I'm probably going to get the answer wrong. I don't know the story, but then when I read it, I'm like, this is actually a pretty straightforward scene. So do you want me to run through what I saw and you can just tell me?
Sure. Okay. Sounds good.
So the goal for Tova in this scene is she wants to clean for her shift, right? That's what she's here to do. She wants to do a good job, and it's simple, which is a great example of, because sometimes writers are like, I don't know what my character's goal is. Look at Tova. She's just showing up to her workday trying to clean, and she wants to get this specific piece of gum off the floor.
And that, I think that's where when you get specific, you can really zero in on like a specific goal, not just cleaning, but getting this stubborn gum off, right?
Yeah. Right when we meet her, this is her main thing. So then the inciting incident I saw was when she's in that break room and she sees an octopus behind the vending machine. So then there's conflict where she starts interacting with him, and the turning point, which is the moment where it's like the peak moment of conflict that's eventually going to force her to face a decision. To me, that was when then Marcellus shoves the chair, and Tova interprets that as with alarming strength. So at
Mhm.
that point, it's kind of like, well, what do I do? Because she's a little bit scared, but she also knows that if she doesn't help him, he's going to die. So that's her crisis. Keep helping or just leave him to his demise. And the climax is she helps, and then the resolution, she frees the octopus and sees him in his tank.
Okay. So that's really interesting. I love your breakdown. I could see arguments. It's interesting that your inciting incident is when Marcellus is behind the vending machine.
Yeah.
And the main action like events happen in that moment.
Yeah.
So I think when you're deciding what is the main value change, do you think the main value change is for this scene?
I think that because she saved him, there's like a trust built, or she's moving closer on the side of like, I'm okay with her from Marcellus's point of view.
Okay. So I think that's definitely one way that you could go. I could see if people were to argue that the inciting incident would be the gum, because if it's this idea of her trying to clean, just, if she's going in with a goal, if I just want to clean, and then the gum is in particular is what she has to spend a lot of time with.
Mm-hmm.
And then the turning point could be Marcellus being behind the vending machine, and the crisis is, what does she do about that? Does she try to rescue him or not? The climax would be her trying, and the resolution could be a lot about how he actually behaves as she tries to rescue him. So I could see that as an argument. I also see your argument, and that's probably where I lean, even though the inciting incident comes much later in the scene because of that. I would agree with you. I think that it would go towards the vending machine inciting incident, because this is truly the unexpected disturbance. Like, is gum big enough of an unexpected disturbance? Probably not.
Well,
right? Go ahead.
And I think that's interesting because I kind of got into the weeds on this with myself yesterday. Is the first line is Tova Sullivan prepares for battle, and then a yellow rubber glove sticks up from her back pocket like a canary's plume as she bends over to size up her enemy, chewing gum. So it's kind of like we meet her and she's already pursuing this goal.
Yes.
So how I understood that was that's not necessarily a surprise then if we're meeting her as she's doing this.
Right. It's more showing. I think what it does is that it establishes Tova as someone who doesn't just take okay or decently cleaned as acceptable. She's going to get her gloves on. She's going to get on her knees, and she's going to get this stubborn piece of gum that even leaves stains. Like, she is going to work on this. And as she's working on that, we're able to see her interacting with the other sea creatures.
Right.
We also see that Marcellus is in his tank, and then later he's out of his tank. So that is more him being behind the vending machine. That truly is a surprise, right? Because he was there, and now he's what? Like, she thinks it's a sweater at first.
Yeah.
Right. So he's fast, and also he camouflages with everything.
Yeah.
So when he's stuck behind the vending machine, it's this also, like, probably is a testament to Marcellus's intelligence, but it's almost like he waits for her to see him until he goes out. It's like, she thought I was here, but now I'm yeah, he's always trying to be sneaky, which is fun. So with the inciting incident with him behind the vending machine, I do think that works. For the turning point for me, I could see the pushing the chair with great strength, because it's scary. I think I landed more on when the tentacles wrapped around her arm, and there is a moment of her debating if she continues or not.
I was looking for that part because I wanted to see there's two parts that I think are like that. So I'll read both of them and then we can decide. Here's the part that I saw, and then we'll look at the part you saw. So at the sound, the octopus lashes again, shoving one of the chairs with alarming force. The chair skids across the room and ricochets off the opposite wall. From under the table, the creature's impossibly clear eye gleams. Determined, Tova creeps closer, trying to steady her shaking hands. How many times has she passed by the plaque under the giant Pacific octopus tank? She can't recall it stating anything about octopuses being dangerous to humans. She's but a foot away. He seems to be shrinking, and his color has become pale. So that could also be a turning point, that is, she's noticing he's become pale. Then she's thinking, does an octopus have teeth? Then she says, my friend, she says softly, I'm going to reach around you, unplug the cord, blah, blah, blah. So that's one option. And I'm going to look to your option. Okay, so she expects him to slink out along the wall toward the door in the direction he's been straining, but instead he slides closer. Like a tawny snake, one of his arms slithers towards her. In seconds, it winds around her forearm, then twists around her elbow and bicep like a maypole ribbon. She can feel each individual sucker clinging to her. Reflexively, she tries to yank her arm away, but the octopus tightens his grip to the point where it's almost uncomfortable. But his strange eye glints playfully like a naughty child's. Empty takeout cartons, misplaced trash, now it makes sense. Then in an instant he releases her. Tova watches incredulous as he stalks out of the break room, suckering along on the thickest part of each of his 8 legs. And then she goes after him. and he's
So,
nowhere to be seen.
which, right. Well, so, and like, I think where I went with that part was because also I know that later the bruises on her arm are something that she has to lie about.
Yeah.
So I think that's where I went with that. But I think the physical force now wrapped around her, like, what do you do when
Yeah. And
like,
so I
is this
think
going to be good or bad? At the same time, though, what you mentioned though a second ago, Savannah, was she notices the pale
right.
color. I think I actually land on that over the other two
Yeah, and I
when
was
you
just
said
thinking
that.
that too, because it's kind of like that's where she's setting us up to focus. Like, well, now he's
Yes.
become pale. I really have to do something. So
Yes.
maybe
And
that's what we'll go with. The cool thing is that no matter which option we just chose, it gets us to the same spot.
yes. And that I think is something that's really important to point out because again, I like to emphasize to writers that this is really great. These are great tools for us to use as writers and as book coaches and as editors because it helps us defend if there is a
Right.
change in value in the scene, if something significant happens in the scene that develops characters and advances the plot. But our reader isn't analyzing it to this level, right?
Right.
So are major complications happening that are challenging the main character to make a crisis decision? Because I do think that the combination of the turning point and the crisis is really what changes the value. So if the turning point is going to cause a crisis in some way about whether or not she's going to continue to pursue saving Marcellus or not,
Right.
that's ultimately the general idea of this, right?
Right. And that's what causes the value shift, like we were saying. It brings them together because this is about their relationship and how it affects each of their lives, right?
Yeah.
So it
But
does
I'm
what
glad I'm glad you pulled out the pale color change because
yeah,
as soon as you said that, I was like, nope, that's
that's it.
the turning
Yeah.
point.
Yeah. And it's funny because that speaks to his first chapter, which is like, am I going to live or die for these
Exactly.
30 days or whatever?
Exactly. And what's cool about that is that it seems like he understands, unlike people who are afraid of death, like he embraces the inevitability of death without concern, it seems like. It's just a matter of time. But how is he going to live life well during that time? And it stinks if his life is going to be cut short,
Dying
having
behind a
some
vending
fun,
machine.
right?
And the
But
cool
it's
thing,
not.
I was just thinking if I were to ask myself questions, I'd be thinking, how does this affect the global story? So we said it brings them together, right?
Right.
And earlier we talked about they both need to kind of find meaning in their last days. So by bringing them together, we're moving them one step closer to being able to have that meaning. And
Exactly.
even Tova's night or day, I think it's night when she's cleaning, but her day has gotten meaning by saving Marcellus.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And it is nighttime. This is something that they're the only people in the aquarium because,
Yeah.
well, Cameron and Tova, because Tova comes to help Cameron a lot. They're the only people in the aquarium. And that's where they can have these, secret interactions with Marcellus.
Yeah.
Which is really cool because it's this iconic decision that changes Marcellus's opinion about this particular human.
Right.
And through that friendship borns, and through that, he's able to make observations that humans often overlook that lead to her new sense of physical and emotional meaning. And in receptively, she's able to give that back to Marcellus in the end too. It's like a gift for a gift type of thing.
Yeah, I think it's pretty cool. Pretty well done.
Yeah. Yeah. So I loved the story. And it will be interesting, Savannah, if you continue reading the story or not. I loved it. I think I highly recommend it. I gave it 5 stars. It really hit me on a lot of emotional levels, which is why I think, again, why I probably lean towards the worldview, but there's a lot of arguments that could be made. I think it's genre blending, but when it comes down to it, I just really love the characters and the storyline and the uniqueness of it.
Yeah. Definitely a fun exercise too, like having not read it. And we're going to do a few more episodes like this where one of us hasn't read the book because I think at some point we're going to find one where the analysis looks very different. But this one just happened to be straightforward, but still fun. And yeah, I want to say I'm probably not going to read it just for the same reason I haven't watched like Marley and Me. I was very traumatized by things like Where the Red Fern Grows and Black Beauty when I was little.
Oh,
So
yeah. Where the Red Fern Grows.
yeah,
I never will get that out of my head. And
I just
Marley and Me, I finished the climax on an airplane and was bawling.
yeah, I
To me, were
handle
like,
that.
what is wrong with you? And it's like,
I
well,
cannot handle stuff
dogs.
like that. So I already don't want to know that Marcellus is going to die. I just
Well, just know that he is happy before he dies. So
but still, I don't know. There's just it's too close to me for some reason. But
I understand. I get it. Yeah.
yeah. So
Yeah, this was fun. I'm excited to do more of these. I'd love to hear if any listeners have read this or what their analysis was. Savannah and I always love chatting with our listeners and with, other kindred spirit writers. So let us know if you had any different analysis. But until next time, thanks, Savannah. I loved being
thank
here with you
you.
as always.
So that's it for today's episode. As always, thank you so much for tuning in and for showing your support. If you want to check out any of the links I mentioned in this episode, you can find them in the show notes listed in the description of each episode, inside your podcast player, or at savannahgilbo.com/podcast. If you're an Apple user, I'd really appreciate it if you took a few seconds to leave a rating and a review. Your ratings and reviews tell Apple that this is a podcast that's worth listening to. And in turn, your reviews will help this podcast get in front of more fiction writers just like you. And while you're there, go ahead and hit that follow button because there's going to be another brand new episode next week full of actionable tips, tools, and strategies to help you become a better writer. So I'll see you next week, and until then, happy writing.